My name is Claire Bennett, and I'm 32 years old. Right now, I'm standing in my kitchen, staring at the remnants of what should have been a perfect dinner party. My sister-in-law Veronica's cruel laughter still echoes in my mind, replaying the moment she declared my homemade lasagna utterly pathetic in front of my entire family. The humiliation burns fresh, her words cutting deeper than any knife in my drawer. But what Veronica doesn't know, what none of them know, could destroy everything she's built. As I scrape her barely touched plate into the trash, I feel something shift inside me, rage mixing with a calculated calm I've never experienced before. Little did she know, she had just insulted the wrong person's cooking, and I was about to serve her a dish she'd never forget. Before we dive into how I turned the tables on my nightmare in-laws, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you've ever had to deal with a difficult family member who just wouldn't give you respect, go ahead and hit that like button right now. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications because you won't want to miss what happens when Veronica finds out the truth. Trust me, the revenge is sweeter than any dessert I've ever made. Now, let's get into this story. I met David Bennett 5 years ago at a charity fundraiser where I was working as a server to put myself through culinary school. He was charming, kind, and seemed genuinely interested in my dreams of becoming a chef. We fell hard and fast, married within 18 months, and I thought I'd found my happily ever after. What I hadn't fully understood was that marrying David meant marrying into the Bennett family, a dynasty of old Connecticut money that traced their lineage back to the Mayflower and never let anyone forget it. His mother Patricia ruled the family like a queen presiding over her court, making decisions about everything from business investments to what everyone should wear to Sunday brunch. His father Robert was a distant figure who spent most of his time locked in his study or traveling for his investment firm, barely acknowledging my existence beyond a polite nod at family gatherings. Then there was Veronica, David's older sister, who had married Tyler Hutchinson, whose family wealth made even the Bennetts look middle class by comparison. From the moment I entered their world, I felt the subtle condescension that comes with being the outsider who didn't grow up with a trust fund and a summer house in the Hamptons. My background was solidly middle class, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat after my father left when I was 7. I put myself through culinary school by working every possible shift at restaurants, catering companies, and even a brief stint at a food truck that specialized in gourmet tacos. I was proud of my journey, proud of the fact that I'd earned everything I had through sheer determination and talent. But to the Bennetts, my lack of pedigree was a stain that no amount of achievement could wash away. They never said it directly, of course, because people like the Bennetts are far too well-bred for outright cruelty. Instead, it came in backhanded compliments, raised eyebrows, and the kind of polite suggestions that feel like paper cuts to your self-esteem. The monthly family dinners at the Bennett estate were mandatory, a tradition that Patricia enforced with the iron will of a military general. Every first Saturday of the month, we'd gather in their palatial dining room with its crystal chandeliers and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, eating meals prepared by their private chef, while making small talk about country clubs and charity boards. I'd never be invited to join. I tried so hard to fit in during those early years, bringing homemade dishes that showcased my culinary training, hoping to impress them with my skills. I'd spend days perfecting a dish, researching their preferences, sourcing the best ingredients I could afford on my modest income from the small catering business I'd started after graduating. But no matter what I brought, it was never quite right. The flavors were too bold, or not refined enough, or simply not what they were accustomed to eating. Patricia would take a small bite, smile tightly, and say something like, "How interesting, dear," before pushing her plate aside and asking the chef to bring out something else. David loved me. I truly believed that. But his love came with a caveat. He was forever caught between his wife and his family. And more often than not, his family won. He'd squeeze my hand under the table when his mother made a particularly cutting remark, but he never actually defended me out loud. When Veronica would compare me unfavorably to Tyler's ex-girlfriend, who apparently came from better stock, David would change the subject rather than tell his sister to stop. I understood on some level that standing up to Patricia Bennett was no small feat. Shed raised her children to value family loyalty above all else, and disagreeing with her felt like treason in their world. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less when E'd drive home from these dinners in tears, while David made excuses about how that's just how his family was, how I shouldn't take it personally, how they'd warm up to me eventually. My catering business was the one bright spot in my life, the place where I felt competent and valued. I'd started it small, doing birthday parties and small corporate events, but word spread quickly about the quality of my food. Within 3 years, I had a waiting list of clients and had hired a small team to help me keep up with demand. But I kept the business low-key around the Bennetts, referring to it as my little side project when they asked what I did with my time. I told myself it was humility, but really, it was self-protection. I couldn't bear the thought of them diminishing this thing I'd built, turning my success into another opportunity to remind me that I'd never measure up to their standards. So I smiled and nodded when they talked about their important work on charity boards, never mentioning that my catering company had just been hired to handle the mayor's holiday party, or that a food critic had called my signature dish a revelation. The tension had been building for 6 months, ever since Patricia had pulled David aside after a family dinner and suggested, loudly enough for me to overhear, that perhaps he'd made a mistake marrying someone so common. Shed followed it up with helpful suggestions about marriage counselors who specialized in helping couples from different backgrounds, her tone making it clear she thought the problem was me, not the enormous class divide Shed spent 5 years reminding me existed. David had assured me he'd told his mother to back off, but her comments only grew more pointed after that. Veronica picked up on the permission this gave her, ramping up her own criticisms until every interaction felt like walking through a minefield. When this month's dinner was scheduled to be at our house, the first time Wed hosted the entire family, I saw it as my chance to finally prove myself. I'd show them that I belonged, that I could create a meal worthy of the Bennett name, that I was more than just the working-class girl their son had inexplicably fallen for. I spent 3 full days preparing for that dinner, treating it with the same level of intensity it'd give a high-profile catering event. I planned an elaborate Italian feast, drawing on my grandmother's recipes that had been passed down through generations of women in my family. The menu included handmade pasta that I'd rolled out myself, letting each sheet dry to perfect translucence before cutting it into delicate ribbons. The centerpiece was lasagna, my grandmother's signature dish that had won me the grand prize at culinary school and had been requested by clients who'd tasted it at events I'd catered. I made the sauce from scratch, using San Marzano tomatoes I'd special ordered, letting it simmer for hours until the flavors melded into something that tasted like home and love and tradition. For dessert, I prepared tiramisu using espresso I'd ground myself and mascarpone I'd driven 40 minutes to a specialty Italian market to find. Every detail was considered, every flavor profile balanced, every presentation element designed to showcase both my skill and my heritage. David helped when he could, though he was distracted by work calls and seemed more anxious about the dinner than excited. He kept asking if I was sure I wanted to go to all this trouble, suggesting we could just order from that Italian place his family liked or even hire a caterer. I insisted, needing him to understand that this mattered to me, that I wanted his family to taste food made with love, rather than just expensive ingredients assembled by hired help. The table setting took me an entire afternoon, using the good dishes Wed received as wedding gifts but rarely used, arranging fresh flowers I'd bought from a local florist, and setting out candles that would cast a warm, welcoming glow. By the time 6 o'clock arrived, our little house looked like something from a magazine, and I felt a flutter of hope that maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. Patricia arrived first, punctual as always, sweeping through our front door in a designer suit that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. Her eyes immediately began cataloging everything, and I watched her take in our modest living room with its second-hand furniture and walls that needed repainting. She commented that the house was quaint, which in Patricia speak was one step above calling it a hovel, and suggested that perhaps we should consider moving to a better neighborhood now that David was doing so well at the firm. Robert followed her in, barely glancing at me before heading straight to David's study, muttering something about needing to make an important call. It barely recovered from their arrival when Veronica and Tyler pulled up in Tyler's new Mercedes, the kind that costs more than most people make in a year. Veronica emerged wearing a cocktail dress that screamed designer, her jewelry catching the early evening light. Her entire appearance calculated to remind me that we existed in different stratospheres. Her first words weren't hello or thank you for having us, but a pointed observation about me cooking myself. She said it was quaint, that same word her mother had used, drawing it out so it sounded like an insult dressed in politeness. She mentioned that she and Tyler usually just hired caterers for their dinner parties, as if the idea of preparing food with one's own hands was somehow beneath her. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood, smiled, and offered them drinks. Tyler at least had the grace to look uncomfortable, accepting a glass of wine and complimenting the flowers. We made awkward small talk in the living room while I finished the final preparations, and I could hear Veronica's voice carrying from the other room, making comments about the decor, and wondering aloud why we hadn't done more with the space. David fielded her questions with increasing tension in his voice, but he didn't tell her to stop, didn't defend our home or my efforts, just made non-committal sounds and changed the subject whenever possible. When I finally called everyone to dinner, there was a moment of polite appreciation for how the table looked. Patricia even smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes, and said it'd done a nice job with the presentation. I served the first course, a simple caprese salad with tomatoes from the farmer's market and fresh mozzarella, drizzled with balsamic reduction I'd made myself. The initial bites were accompanied by polite murmurs, and I started to relax, thinking maybe this would be okay. But then Patricia mentioned that the tomatoes were a bit too ripe, and Veronica agreed, saying she preferred her caprese with tomatoes that had more firmness. Robert didn't comment at all, just pushed the tomatoes to the side of his plate and asked David about quarterly earnings. The pasta course came next, and I watched nervously as everyone took their first bites of the fettuccine alfredo I'd spent hours perfecting, getting the sauce to that exact consistency where it coats the pasta without being too heavy. Then came the main course, the lasagna I'd poured my heart into, and that's when everything fell apart. I served generous portions, the layers visible where I'd cut into it, the cheese still bubbling slightly from the oven. Patricia picked at it with her fork, taking a small bite and chewing slowly, her expression unreadable. Robert took a bite and said nothing, which somehow felt worse than criticism, but it was Veronica who delivered the killing blow. She took one bite, made a face like shed tasted something spoiled, and set down her fork with enough force that it clinked loudly against her plate. The sound cut through the polite dinner conversation like a gunshot. Then she said it, loud enough for everyone to hear, her voice dripping with disdain. She called my lasagna utterly pathetic and barely edible, the words hanging in the air like poison gas. She didn't stop there, launching into a comparison with some exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, where she and Tyler had eaten the previous week, describing their lasagna in loving detail, while mine sat congealing on her plate. Tyler laughed along, though his laughter sounded forced and his eyes wouldn't meet mine. David looked uncomfortable, his face flushing red, but he didn't say anything, just stared at his own plate like the pattern on the china was suddenly fascinating. Patricia nodded along with Veronica's assessment, adding her own gentle suggestion that perhaps I should stick to simpler foods I could handle, implying that Italian cuisine was somehow beyond my capabilities. The humiliation washed over me in waves, each comment another bucket of ice water dumped on my head. I felt my face burning, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to let fall in front of them, my hands shaking as I gripped my napkin under the table. I excused myself to the kitchen, mumbling something about checking on dessert, and stood there, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. Through the doorway, I could hear Veronica continuing her critique, her voice carrying clearly as she wondered aloud how David could stand eating this kind of garbage every night. She said it loud enough to ensure I'd hear, painting a picture of poor David suffering through my pathetic attempts at cooking, suggesting it was no wonder he was always having lunch meetings, because at least he could get decent food away from home. Patricia made sympathetic noises, and I heard her tell David that it was never too late to make changes, her meaning crystal clear. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and saw a text from Maya, my business partner, asking how dinner with the in-laws from hell was going. I typed back a furious summary, my fingers flying over the keys, and Maya's response was immediate and fierce, reminding me exactly who I was and what I'd accomplished. Standing alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the dishes I'd spent days preparing, I seriously considered taking the entire lasagna and throwing it in the trash, followed by every other course I'd made. My phone buzzed again with another message from Maya, this one more insistent, reminding me that I wasn't just some housewife playing at cooking. I was Claire Delacroix, graduate of the International Culinary Institute with honors, winner of multiple competitions, owner of a catering company that had a 6-month waiting list for events. My clients weren't just anyone off the street. I'd catered for Fortune 500 executives who flew me to different cities for their corporate events. I'd prepared intimate dinners for celebrities who paid premium rates for discretion and excellence. I'd consulted with restaurants on menu development and trained under chefs whose names appeared in culinary textbooks. The governor of our state had my number on speed dial because when he needed food for important political dinners, he called me. But the Bennetts had no idea about any of this because I'd made a deliberate choice when I married David. I'd kept my professional life separate, using my maiden name Delacroix for business and never correcting David's family when they assumed my catering company was just a small-time operation doing birthday parties and baby showers. I'd told myself it was about maintaining boundaries, keeping one part of my life that was purely mine. But standing there listening to Veronica tear apart my grandmother's recipe, I realized it was also about fear. I'd been afraid that if they knew the truth, they'd find some way to diminish it, to make my success seem smaller, to turn even this into another reminder that I didn't belong in their world. So I'd hidden my light under a basket, and now that basket was suffocating me. Maya's text asked if I was ready to stop playing small, and something inside me cracked open. I took a deep breath, wiped my eyes, and walked back into the dining room with the tiramisu I'd prepared. Veronica had taken it upon herself to clear the plates while I was gone, helpfully removing the evidence of my pathetic dinner, as she put it, stacking them carelessly near the kitchen door. She made a show of looking doubtful about the dessert before even tasting it, wondering aloud if it would be as disappointing as the main course. That's when David finally spoke up, his voice weak but present, telling Veronica that she'd said enough. But Veronica just laughed, turning to David with exaggerated concern, saying she was doing me a favor by telling me the truth. She insisted that someone needed to be honest with me about my limitations, that it was cruel to let me continue thinking I could cook when clearly I couldn't. Patricia jumped in to support her daughter, patting my hand in what she probably thought was a comforting gesture, suggesting that perhaps cooking just wasn't my strength and I should focus on other things. Tyler added his voice to the chorus, mentioning the chef Veronica had hired for their last dinner party, going on about how incredible the food had been, how that was what real cooking looked like. The message was clear and it was unanimous, at least among David's family. I was being told, in the politest possible terms, that I was a failure in the kitchen. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with one of my professional-grade knives. These people, who'd probably never prepared a meal from scratch in their lives, were sitting in judgment of skills they couldn't begin to comprehend. I served the tiramisu in silence, watching as they picked at it with the same disdainful expressions they'd worn all evening, and something cold and calculating settled into place where my hurt had been. If they wanted to play games, I could play games. I'd just been playing the wrong game this whole time, trying to win their approval when I should have been showing them exactly who they'd been underestimating. Veronica was the one who provided me with the perfect opportunity for revenge, though she had no idea what she was handing me. As we were having coffee after the disastrous dessert, she announced with great fanfare that she was hosting a major charity gala in 3 weeks. It was the social event of the season, she explained, with 200 guests expected, a live auction for various causes, and strict black tie dress code. She'd been planning it for months, she said, and had spared no expense to make it perfect. Then she dropped the detail that made my heart skip a beat. Shed hired, in her words, the most exclusive caterer in the state to handle the food. She emphasized that only the best would do for an event of this caliber, that she couldn't risk serving anything pathetic, and she looked directly at me when she said that word, making sure I understood the dig. I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral, which caterer Shed chosen. Veronica practically glowed with pride as she said the name. Delacroix Catering. She added that I wouldn't have heard of them because they were very elite, working only with clients who met certain standards, catering only the most important events. She described how difficult it had been to book them, how they had a waiting list that stretched for months, how Shed had to pull strings and call in favors to get them to agree to take on her gala. Patricia nodded approvingly, saying that Shed heard wonderful things about Delacroix Catering from her friends on various charity boards. Robert mentioned that they'd catered a corporate event for his firm, and the food had been exceptional. Tyler agreed, saying his business partner had used them for his wedding and hadn't stopped talking about how incredible everything was. I sat there, coffee cup frozen halfway to my lips, listening to them praise my company, my food, my work, while having just spent the entire evening telling me I couldn't cook. The irony was so perfect it was almost beautiful. I managed to get out that it was an interesting choice, my voice steady despite the screaming happening inside my head. Veronica took my comment as ignorance, explaining condescendingly that, of course, I wouldn't understand the difference between real haute cuisine and simple home cooking. She said that what Delacroix Catering did was art, that their chef was classically trained and had worked in Michelin-starred restaurants, that every dish was a masterpiece of flavor and presentation. I nodded along, asking innocent questions about the menu, the timeline, the expectations, and Veronica answered every one, digging herself deeper without realizing she was standing in her own grave. After the guests finally left, after Eid cleaned up the remains of my humiliating dinner party and boxed up the leftovers that no one had wanted to take home, David and I had the fight that had been brewing all evening. I unleashed everything he'd been holding back, asking him why he hadn't defended me, why he'd sat there in silence while his family tore me apart. David tried to make excuses, falling back on his usual explanations about how that's just how his family was, how I was being too sensitive, how they didn't mean any real harm. But this time I didn't let him get away with it. I pushed back, demanding to know when exactly he planned to stand up for me, when his loyalty to me would outweigh his fear of his mother. The fight escalated until David finally admitted something that made my blood run cold. He told me that his mother had been pressuring him about our marriage for months, suggesting that I wasn't suitable, that I was holding him back socially and professionally. Patricia had given him brochures for marriage counselors, but the kind that specialized in helping couples separate amicably. Shed even suggested, more than once, that maybe they'd rushed into marriage, that it wasn't too late to correct the mistake. David swore Head defended me to his mother, that Head told her our marriage was solid and she needed to back off. But his actions tonight, his silence in the face of Veronica's cruelty, told a different story. I realized with crushing clarity that I'd been alone in this marriage for a long time, that David's love for me would always come with the asterisk of his family's approval. He chose them, would always choose them, and I was tired of coming in second. The next morning, I left the house while David was still sleeping and drove to my commercial kitchen on the other side of town. David thought I was heading to a small catering gig, just another one of my little side projects, as he called them. He had no idea that the industrial kitchen I was walking into was a 15,000 square foot facility with state-of-the-art equipment, a staff of 12, and enough business to generate 7 figures annually. Maya was already there when I arrived, along with Sophie, our event coordinator, and they took one look at my face and knew something major had happened. Over coffee, I told them everything, not holding back any detail of the humiliating dinner or the cruel things that had been said about my cooking. Sophie pulled up our event calendar on her tablet, scrolling through the upcoming bookings, and that's when we all saw it at the same time. The Bennett Charity Gala, scheduled for 3 weeks from now. Client name Veronica Bennett Hutchinson. I'd been avoiding looking at the details of this particular event, knowing it was for David's family but not wanting to engage with it emotionally. Maya asked the obvious question, whether we should cancel. Whether it was ethical for me to cater an event for someone who'd just spent an evening insulting my food. But as she asked it, an idea began forming in my mind. Something delicious and dangerous and absolutely perfect. I told them we weren't canceling. We were going to give Veronica exactly what she asked for, and then some. The plan started coming together as we talked it through. I would cater the event myself, not just oversee it but be there in person, executing the menu with my team. Veronica had no idea that Claire Bennett and Claire Delacroix were the same person, because she'd never bothered to ask questions about my business, never cared enough to learn my maiden name, or wonder why I might have kept it for professional purposes. She'd made assumptions based on her own prejudices, and those assumptions were about to backfire spectacularly. But I wouldn't reveal myself until the perfect moment, after she'd tasted the food and praised it, after she'd told all her important guests about the exclusive caterer she'd hired, after she'd put herself in a position where the revelation would cause maximum impact. Sophie pulled up the email correspondence we'd had with Veronica over the past 2 months, and reading through it made me angrier with each message. Veronica had been condescending and demanding, sending long lists of requirements and changes, treating my staff like servants rather than professionals. One email specifically mentioned her pathetic sister-in-law who'd tried to cook Italian last week, instructing us to please ensure our food was actually edible, unlike some people's attempts. Another email laid out her standards, emphasizing that she needed everything to be perfect because, unlike some people, she had expectations. I had Sophie screenshot every single email, every insulting comment, every piece of evidence that Veronica had no idea who she was talking to. Maya suggested making the menu even more spectacular than what Veronica had requested, really showing off what I could do when I wasn't holding back. I agreed immediately, already mentally adjusting dishes to showcase techniques I'd learned from masters, incorporating ingredients that cost more than most people's car payments, creating presentations that would be Instagram-worthy and talk of the town for months. This would be my masterpiece, the meal that proved once and for all exactly who I was and what I was capable of. Sophie warned me that this could backfire, that publicly humiliating my sister-in-law might cause permanent damage to my marriage and my relationship with David's family. I told her that ship had already sailed, that permanent damage had been done the moment they'd decided I wasn't good enough, and spent 5 years making sure I knew it. I called in my A-team, the chefs I worked with on only the most important events, the ones who understood that food could be art and were willing to put in the hours to make it perfect. I explained the situation without using names at first, just telling them that this event was personal and I needed them to help me create something unforgettable. Every single person said yes without hesitation, because that's the kind of loyalty I'd built over years of treating my staff with respect and paying them what they were worth. We spent the next week testing menu items, sourcing ingredients from specialty suppliers, perfecting every element until it was restaurant quality times 10. I worked 18-hour days, barely sleeping, channeling all my hurt and anger into creating dishes that would make Veronica's exclusive restaurant comparison look pathetic in retrospect. 2 weeks before the gala, Veronica invited herself over to our house for lunch, showing up unannounced with fabric swatches and photographs spread across her arms. She claimed she wanted my opinion on color schemes and table arrangements, but it became obvious within minutes that she had no intention of actually listening to anything I said. Every suggestion I made was dismissed or ignored, and I realized she'd come over specifically to gloat about the upcoming event, to rub in my face how her party would show everyone what real entertaining looked like. She kept bringing the conversation back to food, mentioning how glad she was that she'd hired professionals instead of trying to do it herself like some people. The dig was obvious and intentional, and I just smiled and nodded, letting her think she was winning. Then Veronica casually mentioned the cost of the catering, and I nearly choked on the tea I was drinking. She said she was paying $50,000 for Delacroix Catering to handle the event, a number that was $15,000 higher than the quote we'd actually given her. I made a mental note to check our invoicing because either there was an error or Tyler was inflating numbers to his wife. Veronica explained that Tyler's business partner had recommended Delacroix, that Head used them for his wedding the previous year and said it was the best food Head ever tasted. I remembered that wedding well because the groom had been so pleased. Head sent my entire team generous bonuses and written a review that had brought in 10 new high-end clients. It was one of my favorite events, a perfect example of what I could do when given creative freedom and clients who trusted my vision. Veronica continued talking, and I realized she was trying to make me feel small by emphasizing how expensive and exclusive everything was. She described the menu in loving detail, not realizing she was describing my own creations, my signature dishes, recipes I'd developed over years of experimentation. She talked about caviar and gold leaf and rare ingredients, about presentation styles I'd pioneered, about flavor combinations I'd spent months perfecting. And with each word, she was digging herself deeper into the hole I'd prepared for her. When she finally left, I stood at the window watching her drive away in her expensive car, and I felt nothing but cold anticipation for what was coming. That night, everything got worse. David came home late from work and mentioned casually that Veronica had invited him to help with some setup for the gala. He said Shed told him I wouldn't be interested because it was all business talk and networking, things that would bore me. I asked careful questions, keeping my voice neutral, and David revealed more of the plan without realizing what he was telling me. There was a VIP dinner before the main gala, an intimate gathering of 20 people that would include business associates, major donors, and apparently David's ex-girlfriend Stephanie. Veronica had specifically mentioned that Stephanie would be there, adding that it would be nice for old friends to reconnect, and David had agreed to attend without thinking twice about how inappropriate it was. I went upstairs and did something I'm not proud of but didn't regret. I checked David's phone while he was in the shower and found a family group chat that didn't include me. The messages went back months and painted a clear picture of a coordinated campaign to end my marriage. Patricia had written that the gala was the perfect opportunity to show David what he was missing, that Veronica's success would highlight my inadequacy by comparison. Robert had agreed, adding that they needed to make David see reason before it was too late. Veronica had outlined her strategy, which included inviting Stephanie to the event and making sure she and David spent time together. Shed even researched what Stephanie had been doing since she and David broke up 7 years ago, painting a picture of a successful woman from a good family who would have been the perfect Bennett daughter-in-law. The messages were brutal in their honesty because they thought I'd never see them. Patricia wrote about how Shed tried to guide David away from me before the wedding, how Shed hoped it was just a phase he'd grow out of. Veronica had contributed her own observations about how pathetic I was, how I tried so hard to fit in but would never have the breeding or class to truly belong. Even David, my husband, who claimed to love me, had participated in the chat. His messages weren't as cruel as his mother's or sister's, but Head liked their comments, responded with agreement, and most damningly, Head given that thumbs up when Veronica mentioned inviting Stephanie. My heart broke and hardened in the same moment, and I knew that whatever happened at this gala, my marriage was probably over. But I wasn't going to go down quietly or alone. The next day, I sent an email to Veronica as Delacroix Catering, requesting a special addition to our contract. I explained that for an event of this caliber, the owner and executive chef would personally attend to ensure everything met our exacting standards. Veronica's response came back within an hour, enthusiastic and gushing about how honored she'd be to meet the famous Delacroix chef. She asked if there was anything special we needed, any accommodations that would make our work easier, and I had to suppress a laugh at the irony. This woman who'd spent years treating me like hired help was falling over herself to accommodate the chef she didn't know was me. I confirmed all the details, then booked appointments for hair and makeup the day of the event, planning a transformation that would make me unrecognizable from the pathetic sister-in-law she knew. 1 week before the gala, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, I was shocked to hear Tyler's voice on the other end, asking if we could meet to talk about his wife and my husband. We met at a coffee shop across town, both of us paranoid about being seen together, and Tyler revealed something that changed everything. He was miserable in his marriage, had been for years, and Veronica treated him with the same contempt she showed me. had known about the plot against me because Veronica hadn't bothered hiding her planning from him, confident that he'd go along with whatever she wanted because he always did. But Tyler had reached his breaking point, and he wanted out of the Bennett family trap as much as I did. Tyler told me that Patricia had hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me, looking for anything she could use to convince David to leave me. The investigator had done a thorough job, combing through my background, my finances, my business dealings, everything. Tyler had copies of all the reports because the investigator had been instructed to send them to him as well, and he pulled them out now, sliding the folder across the table. I read through page after page of my life examined in clinical detail. They'd found my culinary school records, which were excellent, my business registration, which showed the success of Delacroix Catering, my financial statements, which proved I was doing better than anyone in the Bennett family realized. There was nothing scandalous, nothing they could use against me, so they were planning to manufacture issues instead. Tyler pointed to one report that detailed my catering business, clearly identifying me as the owner and executive chef of Delacroix Catering. But when he showed me the copy that had been sent to Patricia, that page was missing. Tyler had removed it because he wanted me to have the element of surprise, wanted me to be able to fight back when they attacked. He explained his own reasons for helping me, talking about how he wanted out of his marriage but knew Veronica would make a divorce as painful as possible. He needed an ally, someone who understood what it was like to be under the Bennett thumb, and he thought maybe we could help each other escape. I agreed immediately, grateful for the inside information and the support, and we made plans to stay in touch as the gala approached. 2 days before the event, disaster struck. The venue Veronica had booked suddenly canceled, claiming a burst pipe had flooded the entire first floor and repairs would take weeks. Veronica called my business line in a complete panic, her carefully maintained composure shattered, begging to know if Delacroix Catering had a backup venue option. I let her sweat for a few minutes before offering our event space, explaining that it was smaller than her original venue and would require cutting the guest list from 200 to 100. Veronica had no choice but to agree, frantically revising her invitation list and sending out updated information to guests. What she didn't know was that Tyler had tipped me off about Patricia's plan to sabotage the venue, hoping to make Veronica's event fail so she could blame the caterer and by extension blame me for not being a good enough influence on her daughter. Patricia's plan backfired because she didn't know that Delacroix Catering had our own space, a beautifully renovated warehouse with soaring ceilings, industrial chic decor, and enough room for elegant events up to 150 people. Veronica was forced to accept, and I made sure everything was documented in writing, every change to the contract, every new requirement, every panicked email she sent. The paper trail would be important later when people asked what had happened, and I wanted there to be no doubt about who was professional and who was the chaos agent. The stage was set, the players were in position, and in 48 hours, the Bennett family would finally understand exactly who they'd been underestimating all this time. The day before the gala brought one final hurdle in the form of a mandatory tasting that Veronica insisted on despite having already approved the menu weeks earlier. She arrived at our commercial kitchen with Patricia, and, to my surprise, Stephanie in tow. I watched from my hidden office through the security camera system I'd installed years ago for safety purposes, seeing the three of them walk through my domain without recognizing it as mine. The space didn't have my name on it, just the Delacroix Catering logo, and they'd never bothered to ask where I worked or what my business looked like, so they had no reason to connect the dots. My head chef Marcus, a brilliant culinary mind I'd recruited from a struggling restaurant 3 years ago, handled the tasting with perfect professionalism while I listened to every word through the audio feed. Veronica's response to each dish made me want to scream and laugh in equal measure. She declared the first course absolutely divine, the exact same preparation I'd used for the caprese salad shed rejected at my dinner party, just with more expensive ingredients and prettier plating. She swooned over the pasta course, nearly identical to the fettuccine shed pushed aside at my table. When Marcus brought out a preview of the lasagna preparation, a deconstructed version that showcased the same flavors as my grandmother's recipe. Veronica actually moaned with pleasure and declared it the most incredible thing she'd ever tasted. Patricia agreed with every assessment, pontificating about how this was what real cooking looked like, how this was the standard that the Bennett family maintained. Stephanie, who I was seeing clearly for the first time, was exactly what Ed imagined based on descriptions. Blonde, polished, dripping with diamonds and entitlement. As they tasted, I listened to their conversation drift from food to other topics, specifically to David and me. Stephanie mentioned how excited she was for the event, noting that David had confirmed he'd be there and they'd have a chance to catch up. Veronica encouraged this enthusiastically, talking about how wonderful it would be to reconnect old friends, making air quotes around the word friends that made her meaning clear. Patricia chimed in with her own observations about David seeming unhappy lately, about how marriage to the wrong person could drain the life out of even the most vital man. She said this casually while eating my food, praising my work, completely unaware of the irony. Stephanie, emboldened by the encouragement, talked about how she'd always regretted letting David go, how she'd been too young to appreciate what they had, how she'd matured into someone who understood the importance of compatibility in background and breeding. The tasting concluded with everyone expressing their satisfaction and excitement for the next day, and I had to sit in my office taking deep breaths to calm myself down. Maya found me there 20 minutes later, still watching the security footage, replaying the parts where they praised my food while insulting my character. She put a hand on my shoulder and reminded me that tomorrow would be my vindication, that every compliment they'd just given was proof that their criticism had never been about my abilities but about their own prejudices. I spent the rest of that day and most of the night putting final touches on every element of the gala, checking and rechecking details, until Sophie physically took ingredients out of my hands and told me to go home and rest. I couldn't rest, though, lying awake next to David in our bed, knowing that in less than 24 hours, everything would change forever. The morning of the gala, I was at the venue by 4 a.m, earlier than even my earliest team members. The transformation had already begun, with florists creating arrangements and tech crews setting up lighting, but I needed to be in my kitchen, needed the familiar comfort of preparation and cooking to calm my nerves. Maya arrived at 5, taking one look at my face and wordlessly starting coffee while I began prep work on components that had to be fresh. Sophie showed up at 6 with the final floor plans and timeline, and we walked through everything one more time, making sure there were no gaps in our coverage, no moments where something could go wrong. My team started filtering in at 7, each person bringing their A game, because Ed made it clear this event was special, that I needed everyone operating at their absolute highest level. By 10 a.m, the transformation of our event space was nearly complete. What had been an empty warehouse when Ed bought it 5 years ago now looked like something from a luxury magazine, all elegant lines and sophisticated lighting that made even simple things look expensive. The kitchen was a symphony of organized chaos, 8 chefs working in perfect synchronization on different elements of the meal, everyone knowing their role and executing flawlessly. I moved between stations, tasting and adjusting, making sure everything met the standards I'd set. Around noon, I stepped away to begin my own transformation, turning myself from Claire the chef into Claire Delacroix, the culinary celebrity. The hair and makeup artists Id hired worked magic, styling my usually simple appearance into something camera-ready and polished. My hair was swept into an elegant updo that showed off the bone structure of my face. My makeup was dramatic but sophisticated, emphasizing my features in a way I'd never bothered with at family dinners. The dress I'd chosen was designer, a cocktail-length piece in deep emerald that had cost more than I'd normally spend but was perfect for the occasion. I wore my grandmother's diamond earrings, the one piece of real jewelry I owned, and when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. This wasn't pathetic Claire who couldn't cook. This was Claire Delacroix, chef and businesswoman, someone who commanded respect and got it. The guests began arriving at 6 for the VIP dinner, and I watched from the kitchen as Veronica greeted everyone with the air of a queen holding court. She'd outdone herself with her own appearance, wearing a gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, her jewelry elaborate enough to fund a small country. Patricia and Robert arrived shortly after, both dressed impeccably, both wearing expressions of satisfaction at being part of such an exclusive event. David came in alone, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo, and I watched him scan the room as if looking for escape routes. Then Stephanie made her entrance, and I had to admire the calculated perfection of it. She'd timed her arrival to be just late enough to make an entrance, wearing a dress that was stunning without trying too hard, moving through the room until she positioned herself next to David like it was the most natural thing in the world. The VIP dinner was held in our private dining room, an intimate space that seated 20 in comfortable luxury. I'd prepared a 7-course tasting menu specifically for this group, wanting to showcase not just my technical skills, but my creativity and artistic vision. Each course was designed to tell a story, to build on the previous one, to create an experience that was about more than just eating. The first course was oysters prepared 3 ways, each one highlighting a different aspect of the ingredient, served on a custom-made platter with crushed ice and delicate garnishes. I watched through the monitor as they were served, as Veronica made a toast about quality and knowing the difference, as Patricia raised her glass to family standards and successful matches with a meaningful look at David and Stephanie. The meal progressed through its courses, each one met with increasingly enthusiastic responses from the diners. By the time Marcus served the third course, truffle risotto with paper-thin shavings of gold leaf, the conversation had shifted from polite small talk to genuine food appreciation. Even Patricia, who rarely showed enthusiasm about anything, was visibly impressed. But their compliments about the food were interspersed with continued digs about me, and I had to watch as they praised my work with one breath and insulted my character with the next. Veronica made a comment about how grateful she was to be eating real food instead of the pathetic home cooking some people tried to pass off as cuisine. Patricia agreed, mentioning how important it was to know one's limitations, looking pointedly at David as if to remind him that his wife was limited in ways Stephanie was not. David, to his minimal credit, looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evening wore on, his jaw tight, his responses to questions becoming shorter and more clipped. When Stephanie tried to feed him a bite of the 5th course, an intimacy that crossed every line of appropriateness, he stood abruptly and announced he needed air. Stephanie followed immediately, playing the concerned friend, while Veronica smirked and whispered something to Patricia about their plan working. Tyler, who'd been mostly silent through dinner, excused himself as well, and I knew from our previous conversations that he was going to try to warn David about what was happening, to give him a chance to salvage his marriage before it was too late. I checked my appearance one final time, signaled to Sophie that it was almost time, and prepared to make my entrance into the main event. The VIP dinner concluded and guests moved to the main ballroom where the charity gala was in full swing, 80 additional guests having arrived while the intimate dinner was happening. The space looked incredible, our design team having transformed it into something that rivaled the finest event venues in the city. Champagne flowed from a fountain centerpiece, a string quartet played classical music from a raised platform, and the silent auction tables displayed items ranging from luxury vacations to original artwork. My team circulated through the crowd with trays of elaborate hors d'oeuvres, each one a miniature work of art that guests photographed before eating. The social media posts had already started, people tagging the location and Delacroix catering, raving about the food and the ambiance, giving Veronica exactly the kind of attention she'd been craving. Veronica was in her element, moving through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting compliments about the event with false modesty, while making sure everyone knew she was responsible for every detail. Patricia worked the room as well, holding court with the society matrons and business executives who formed her social circle, occasionally gesturing toward Veronica with obvious pride. Stephanie had reattached herself to David after their break for air, and I watched them through the kitchen monitor, seeing David's discomfort warring with his inability to be outright rude to someone his family clearly wanted him to engage with. Tyler stood off to the side, nursing a drink and watching his wife perform, and when he caught the security camera's angle, He gave a small nod that I understood meant head, warned David that the rest was up to my husband to figure out. The main dinner service began at 8, with guests taking their assigned seats at tables decorated with elaborate centerpieces and place settings that had taken my team hours to arrange. The first course went out, and I listened to the murmurs of appreciation that rippled through the room as people tasted food that was designed to impress. Each subsequent course built on the success of the previous one, the pacing perfect, the service impeccable, every element coming together to create an experience that people would talk about for months. Veronica had requested that I prepare some of the dishes tableside for dramatic effect, and Id agreed, planning to use those moments to maximum advantage when the time came. Between courses, Veronica took the microphone to thank people for coming and talk about the charity the event was supporting, a cause related to children's education that was legitimate and worthy, even if I suspected Veronica cared more about the social capital than the actual mission. She was a good speaker, commanding attention and working the crowd with practiced ease, and I could see why people were drawn to her despite her cruelty. She had charisma when she wanted to use it, charm that she could turn on and off like a switch. After her speech about the charity, she pivoted to thanking the various vendors and volunteers who'd made the event possible, building up to what she clearly saw as the pinnacle of the evening's success. She announced that she wanted to personally introduce the culinary genius behind the magnificent feast they were all enjoying, describing Delacroix Catering in glowing terms, talking about the exclusive nature of the company, the impossibility of booking them, the prestige of having them cater an event. She painted a picture of a chef who was an artist, a visionary, someone who operated on a level most people could only aspire to. Every word she said was true, and every word was about me, though she had no idea. Patricia beamed from her table, clearly proud of her daughter's coup in securing such prestigious catering. Stephanie looked appropriately impressed, murmuring something to David that made him shift uncomfortably in his seat. And Veronica, standing at the microphone in her designer gown, asked everyone to please welcome the owner and head chef of Delacroix Catering with enthusiastic applause. I removed my chef's coat, revealing the emerald dress I'd been wearing underneath all evening, and stepped out of the kitchen. The walk from the kitchen door to where Veronica stood felt like it took forever and no time at all. I could see the exact moment confusion crossed Veronica's face as she registered that someone she knew was walking toward her from the kitchen. The confusion shifted to denial as her brain tried to make sense of what she was seeing. I took the microphone from her hand, thanked her for the lovely introduction, and watched her face cycle through emotions too quickly to name. The room had gone quiet, sensing drama even if they didn't understand its source yet. Veronica's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out, and I almost felt sorry for her before remembering every cruel word she'd said about my cooking. I introduced myself properly, clearly, making sure my voice carried to every corner of the room. I was Claire Delacroix, owner and executive chef of Delacroix Catering, and I was pleased they were all enjoying the meal. Veronica found her voice enough to stammer that she didn't understand, and I explained with a calm smile that Delacroix was my maiden name, the one Id kept for professional purposes, the one that had been on every email and contract she'd signed. The shocked silence was absolute, broken only when Patricia said from her table that this was impossible, her voice sharp with denial. I assured her it was very possible, that Id built this company from scratch over the past 8 years, that every dish they'd praised tonight had been created by me and my team, that the chef they'd been so impressed with was the same person they'd spent years telling couldn't cook. David's face was a mask of shock, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide as he processed this information. I could see him doing the math, remembering all the times ID mentioned having a catering job, and head nodded absently, never asking questions, never showing interest. Stephanie looked between David and me, clearly uncertain about what was happening but smart enough to recognize that the dynamics had shifted dramatically. Tyler had a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, the only person in the room besides my staff who'd known this was coming. And Veronica looked like she'd been slapped, her careful composure cracking as she realized the implications of what Id just revealed. I wasn't finished. I pulled out my phone, holding it up so the screen was visible, and began reading from the email correspondence Veronica and I had exchanged over the past 2 months. Her voice, captured in writing, talking about how she needed real food, not pathetic homemade garbage like her sister-in-law made. Her words describing me as someone with no standards, someone whose cooking was barely fit for consumption, someone she pitied her brother for having to live with. Every email was dated and time-stamped. Undeniable proof that Shed hired me specifically because she thought I was better than the pathetic sister-in-law she loved to mock. The guests were murmuring now, uncomfortable with being witnesses to this family drama, but unable to look away. I continued reading, my voice steady, sharing with the room how Veronica had specifically requested that the food be actually edible, unlike her sister-in-law's pathetic attempts at cooking. I read her email about needing everything to be perfect because she had standards, unlike some people, the implication clear that the some people she was referring to was me. Each email I shared showed not just her opinions about my cooking but her opinions about me as a person, painting a picture of sustained cruelty and condescension that had nothing to do with actual culinary skill, and everything to do with class prejudice. The room's discomfort grew with each revelation, guests shifting in their seats, some avoiding eye contact with the Bennett family table, others openly staring as the drama unfolded. Then I moved to the evidence of my actual credentials, information that Veronica had never bothered to ask about because Shed made her assumptions and stuck with them. I gestured to the wall where Eid deliberately hung some of my awards and credentials for this event, including the framed certificate from my culinary school graduation where Eid won the grand prize for my grandmother's lasagna recipe, the same pathetic lasagna Veronica had refused to eat. I pulled up photos on my phone, projecting them onto the screen that had been set up for the charity auction presentation, showing images of me with governors and senators and celebrities at events Id catered, showing magazine features about my restaurant consultations, showing the James Beard Award nominations Id received 3 years running. Each image was another nail in the coffin of their assumptions about me. I explained for the benefit of the guests who didn't know the backstory that the risotto they'd enjoyed tonight was based on my grandmother's recipe, the same one Veronica had called too heavy and unsophisticated when Id served it at Christmas dinner. The scallops were my signature preparation, identical to the overcooked seafood Patricia had complained about at Easter. The beef course they'd all photographed and praised was the same cut and preparation method as the roast Veronica had pushed around her plate at Thanksgiving, declaring it barely edible. Everything they'd loved tonight, everything they'd paid $50,000 to experience, was food I'd been making for them at family dinners for 5 years while they told me I couldn't cook. Patricia tried to interrupt, standing from her table and demanding that I stop this inappropriate display, but I was just getting started. I turned to her specifically, addressing the matriarch who'd spent 5 years making me feel inferior at every opportunity. I reminded her, and everyone else in the room, that Shed told me cooking wasn't my strength, that I should stick to simpler things I could handle. Then I shared the detail that Delacroix Catering had been catering Bennett family business events for 2 years, that Patricia herself had complimented my food dozens of times at corporate functions and charity dinners, raving about the quality and sophistication. She just hadn't known it was me, because Shed never connected the dots, never thought to ask questions, never considered that the simple little caterer her son had married might actually be successful and talented. Robert's face showed recognition dawning, and I could see him remembering specific events, specific meals, specific compliments had given to the Delacroix team. His foundation had used my catering for their annual gala, 2 years running, and had personally written a recommendation that I still had framed in my office. Had praised my creativity and execution, had told other board members that Delacroix was the only caterer worth using for important events. And all that time, had been coming to family dinners and barely acknowledging my existence, treating me like I was too insignificant to warrant his attention. The irony was written across his face as he made these connections, and for the first time since I'd known him, Robert Bennett looked embarrassed. Then I addressed Stephanie, the wild card in this drama, the woman who'd been brought in to replace me in David's life. I revealed what Tyler had helped me discover, the financial arrangement Patricia had made to incentivize Stephanie's participation in their scheme. Patricia had promised her $50,000, the same amount as the catering bill, if she could successfully seduce David back and break up our marriage. Tyler had recorded Patricia making this offer, and with his permission, I played the audio for the entire room. Patricia's voice, crystal clear, laying out the terms of the deal, explaining that David needed to be shown what he was missing, that sometimes a man needed help seeing that Head made a mistake. Stephanie's voice agreeing, asking about payment terms, negotiating like this was a business transaction rather than a relationship. David stood so abruptly his chair fell backward, the crash loud in the shocked silence. He looked at his mother with an expression I'd never seen before. Betrayal and rage and hurt all mixed together, and demanded to know if it was true. Patricia tried to backtrack, claiming the audio was taken out of context, that I was manipulating the situation, but the evidence was too clear and too damning. David turned to Stephanie, who had the grace to look ashamed, and asked her directly if she'd been paid to pursue him. When she hesitated, he repeated the question, his voice hard, and she admitted in a small voice that Patricia had made the offer and she'd accepted because she needed the money and thought maybe they could actually reconnect for real. Veronica, who'd been silent through all of this, suddenly found her voice and screamed at me that I'd deceived them all, that I'd been lying and manipulating them for years. I corrected her calmly, pointing out that I'd used my legal name for my business, that there had been no deception except in their own assumptions. They'd assumed I was nobody important because I came from a working-class background, and they'd never bothered to ask questions or look deeper because their prejudices were more comfortable than the truth. Veronica lunged toward me, whether to hit me or grab the microphone I wasn't sure, but Tyler caught her arm and pulled her back. He told her, loud enough for people nearby to hear, that I wasn't the problem, that they were, that their cruelty and snobbery had created this situation, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Patricia made one last attempt to regain control, standing and announcing loudly that this was inappropriate, that these were private family matters that shouldn't be discussed in public. I pointed out that Shed made them public when Shed plotted against me in front of witnesses, when Shed hired investigators to dig into my life, when Shed orchestrated this entire gala as a stage to push David towards Stephanie. Everything I'd revealed tonight was simply the truth that they'd tried to hide, and if it made them look bad, perhaps they should have behaved better. The guests were completely silent now, riveted by the drama, phones out, recording everything because this was the kind of society scandal that would be talked about for years. David approached me, and the crowd parted to let him through, everyone watching to see what he would do. He stopped a few feet away, and I could see tears in his eyes as he asked me why I'd never told him about my success, about my career, about my talent. I looked at him, this man I'd loved enough to marry, and told him the truth. I'd stopped telling him things because Head stopped defending me, because every time his family insulted me, he made excuses instead of standing up for me, because I'd learned that anything I cared about would be used as ammunition against me. I asked him if he would have believed me if I'd told him I was successful, or if he would have sided with his family's assumption that I was exaggerating or lying. He had no answer because we both knew the truth. I told David, with everyone listening, that I was sorry, but sorry wasn't enough anymore. Head had 100 chances to choose me, to defend me, to stand up to his family's cruelty, and Head chosen his comfort over my dignity every single time. The man I'd married would have been appalled by his family's behavior, but somewhere along the way, Head become someone who enabled it through his silence. I still loved him, or at least I loved who I'd thought he was, but I couldn't stay in a marriage where I was always going to come second to his family's approval. The room was absolutely silent as I said this, as I essentially ended my marriage in front of 100 witnesses, but it felt right and true and necessary. I finished my speech by thanking everyone for coming to support the charity, reminding them that whatever personal drama had just unfolded, there were children who would benefit from their donations tonight, and that was what truly mattered. I handed the microphone to Sophie, who smoothly took over and redirected attention back to the auction and the fundraising goals, giving me the chance to walk out of the ballroom with my head high and my dignity intact. Maya and my team followed me, and we left backup staff to finish the service because even in the middle of personal devastation, I was still a professional who completed her obligations. In the parking lot, with the sounds of the gala muffled by distance and walls, I finally let myself feel the weight of what Eid just done, the finality of the break Eid just made with David and his family. David caught up with me before I could get to my car, calling my name as he ran across the parking lot. I turned to face him, and the man who'd stood silent while his family tore me apart was now begging me to stop, to let him explain, to give him a chance to make things right. I asked him how exactly he planned to make it right, what he could possibly say that would undo 5 years of choosing them over me. He broke down, admitting he'd been weak, that he'd been afraid of his family, that he'd let his fear of their disapproval make him into someone he was ashamed of. I told him he'd been afraid too, afraid every time I walked into a family dinner that I'd be humiliated. But I'd fought anyway. I'd stood up for myself when he wouldn't stand up for me. David asked what he could do, said he'd do anything to fix this, and I told him the truth. I needed time and space to figure out if there was anything left of our marriage worth saving, if the man I'd fallen in love with still existed somewhere under the layers of family conditioning and cowardice. I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing alone in the parking lot while inside the venue his family imploded. Through texts from Tyler over the next hour, I learned that Veronica had a complete meltdown, screaming at her husband for betraying her by helping me, while Tyler calmly told her he wanted a divorce. Patricia tried to do damage control with the guests, spinning stories about misunderstandings and family tensions, but the recordings people had made on their phones told the real story. Robert spent the evening on his phone, probably calling lawyers, preparing for the fallout that was sure to come from such a public scandal. And Stephanie, her scheme exposed and her reputation in tatters, left through a side door without saying goodbye to anyone. 3 days later, I was still staying at Maya's apartment, needing space from the house I'd shared with David and everything it represented. My phone had been exploding with calls and messages, interview requests from food magazines and local news stations, new clients who'd seen the viral social media posts and wanted to book Delacroix catering for their events. The story had spread beyond our local social circle, picked up by food blogs and then lifestyle websites, framed as an inspiring tale of a woman standing up to bullying in-laws and proving her worth. The hashtag that emerged, Patheric Lasagna, was trending, with home cooks and professional chefs sharing their own stories of having their cooking unfairly criticized by people who didn't know better. The culinary community rallied around me, with famous chefs I'd never met vouching for my talent and condemning the kind of class-based prejudice the Bennetts had shown. I gave one interview, carefully chosen with a respected food journalist who I knew would handle the story with nuance and fairness. I didn't trash the Bennett family, despite how easy it would have been, didn't air every piece of dirty laundry or share every cruel comment. Instead, I focused on the broader issue of women's work being undervalued, of how assumptions about someone's background can blind people to their actual abilities, of the importance of judging people by their character and skills rather than their pedigree. The interview was classy and measured, making me look sympathetic and reasonable while letting the facts speak for themselves about the Bennett's behavior. Within a week, my business had tripled its bookings, with people specifically requesting me because they wanted to support a woman who'd stood up for herself so publicly. David moved out of his parents' estate, where he'd been staying since our fight, and got his own apartment for the first time in his adult life. He started therapy, working through the family dynamics that had shaped him into someone who could love me but couldn't defend me. He sent me a letter, not a text or email, but an actual handwritten letter that arrived at Maya's apartment 12 pages long. In it, he took full responsibility for his failures as a husband, didn't make excuses or blame his family, acknowledged that he'd been complicit in my mistreatment through his silence. He wrote about the work he was doing in therapy, the realizations he was having about how his mother's control had extended into every aspect of his life. He ended the letter by saying he didn't deserve my forgiveness, but he was committed to becoming someone who would, whether or not I ever gave him another chance. For the first time since the gala, David stood up to his mother when she tried to blame everything on me. Patricia had called him, expecting sympathy and support, and instead David told her that her behavior had been unacceptable, that she'd driven away the best thing in his life, that he needed distance from the family while he figured out who he was without their influence. Tyler filed for divorce from Veronica exactly 1 week after the gala, hiring a ruthless lawyer who made sure the prenuptial agreement was enforced to the letter. Veronica, who'd grown accustomed to Tyler's money and status, found herself facing a drastically reduced lifestyle and had to move from their penthouse to a modest apartment. Tyler sent me a thank you note saying I'd given him the courage to leave, that watching me stand up for myself had shown him it was possible to escape the Bennett family trap. The Bennett family itself began to fracture under the pressure of what had been exposed. Patricia and Robert's marriage, which had been cold and formal for as long as I'd known them, developed cracks that quickly became chasms. Robert admitted to his wife that had been miserable for decades, that her controlling behavior and obsession with appearances had sucked the joy out of their life together. He moved into the guest room and started making plans for his own exit from the marriage, something that would have been unthinkable before the gala but now seemed inevitable. Patricia, left isolated by her own machinations, tried to reach out to David multiple times, but he maintained firm boundaries, telling her he'd consider rebuilding their relationship only after she got therapy and took real accountability for her actions. Veronica, forced by her changed financial circumstances to get a real job for the first time in her life, found work at a PR firm where she discovered she was actually good at something beyond spending money and throwing parties. The humbling experience of having to work for a living, of having to prove her worth through her efforts rather than her connections, changed her in ways I heard about through Tyler. She eventually sent me an email, awkward and stilted, attempting an apology for how she'd treated me. She didn't make excuses or try to justify her behavior, just acknowledged that she'd been cruel and wrong. I didn't respond because I didn't need her apology to move forward with my life, but I appreciated that she'd made the effort. 6 months after the gala, my business was booming beyond anything I'd imagined. I'd opened a second location to handle the increased demand, hired additional staff, and was being featured in culinary magazines as an up-and-coming talent to watch. I appeared on a cooking show as a guest chef, sharing my grandmother's lasagna recipe and the story behind it, and the episode became one of their highest rated of the season. For the first time in years, I was genuinely happy. Not just content or making the best of things, but actually joyful about my work and my life. The success felt earned in a way it might not have if the Bennetts had never challenged me, their cruelty inadvertently pushing me to stop hiding my talents and claim my space in the culinary world. David and I had been meeting for coffee once a month, taking things incredibly slowly, with no promises and no pressure. He was different. Genuinely different in ways that went beyond surface changes. Had cut contact with his mother, except for brief, formal conversations, had quit his job at his father's firm to work for a company where his last name meant nothing, had started building a life that was his own rather than the one his family had planned for him. In therapy, he was working through the ways had been conditioned to value his family's approval over everything else, learning to recognize and resist those patterns. I could see the changes, could see him becoming someone who might actually be capable of being the partner it needed, but I wasn't ready to trust it yet. One evening, 8 months after everything had fallen apart, I invited David to my apartment for dinner. Not Maya's apartment where I'd been staying, but my own new place, a loft I'd rented in the warehouse district that had enough space for a professional-grade kitchen. I cooked my grandmother's lasagna, the same pathetic recipe that had started this entire chain of events, and set the table simply with candles and wine. David arrived looking nervous, carrying flowers and clearly unsure of what this invitation meant. We ate mostly in silence at first, comfortable silence that felt different from the tension-filled meals Wed shared with his family. When he told me the lasagna was the best thing he'd ever tasted, I just smiled and said I knew, and we both laughed, the tension breaking. David told me he didn't expect me to take him back, that he understood he might have destroyed something that couldn't be rebuilt. But he wanted me to know that he saw me now, really saw me for the first time without the filter of his family's prejudices and his own weakness. I told him I saw him too. A version of him I hadn't seen in years. Maybe a version that had been buried under family expectations since before we even met. The question, I said, wasn't whether Head changed but whether the change would last. Whether Head be able to maintain his growth when the pressure came back, as it inevitably would. I told him I needed more time. Maybe another 6 months, maybe a year, to figure out if I could trust him again, if we could build something new from the ruins of what Wed had. David agreed without hesitation, grateful for any chance at all, and we talked late into the night about what we both wanted from life, from relationships, from ourselves. He was becoming a better person. I could see that. Working on himself not because he thought it would win me back, but because Head realized he didn't like who had been. And I was proud of myself for not settling, for insisting on respect and partnership instead of accepting crumbs of affection from someone too weak to defend me. Whether David and I would end up together again remained an open question, but I'd learned something more important than how to save a marriage. I'd learned that I didn't need anyone to validate my worth, that my value existed independently of other people's recognition of it. I started teaching cooking classes at my commercial kitchen, bringing in small groups of eager students who wanted to learn both technique and the philosophy behind good food. Standing in front of them, demonstrating how to layer lasagna or perfect a risotto, I felt a sense of purpose that went beyond just running a successful business. I was sharing my grandmother's legacy, passing on not just recipes but the love and care that went into making food for people who appreciated it. During one class, a student asked about the secret ingredient in my grandmother's lasagna, and I told them the truth. The secret wasn't any particular spice or technique, though those mattered. The real secret was cooking for people who appreciated it, who recognized the work and love that went into a meal, who understood that food was about more than just sustenance. My phone buzzed during the class with a text from Maya about a new celebrity client who wanted to book us for a major event, and another text from David just checking in with no pressure, saying he was thinking of me. I smiled, silenced my phone, and returned my attention to my students who were watching me expectantly, ready to learn. I showed them how to layer the pasta and sauce, how to build flavors, how to create something that was both technically excellent and emotionally resonant. They hung on every word, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions, treating me with the respect I had to fight so hard to demand from the Bennetts. In that moment, surrounded by people who valued what I had to offer, teaching skills I'd spent years perfecting, I felt exactly where I was supposed to be. The final shot of my life, if it were a movie, would show me laughing with my students as we plate up the lasagna they've made under my guidance, tasting it together and celebrating their success. I'm in my element, doing what I love, surrounded by people who appreciate my talents without needing me to prove myself. The business is thriving. My reputation is solid. My personal life is complicated but honest. I don't know yet if David and I will find our way back to each other. Don't know if his transformation will last, or if we've damaged things beyond repair. But I know that it'll be okay either way. That I've built a life I'm proud of. That I've learned to value myself even when others don't. And really, that's the most important ingredient in any recipe for happiness. So what do you think? Have you ever had to prove yourself to someone who underestimated you? Has anyone in your family ever put you down only to discover they were completely wrong about your abilities? Drop your stories in the comments below because I'd love to hear them. And if you think I did the right thing by exposing the truth at that gala, hit that like button. If you think I went too far or handled it wrong, tell me that too, because I'm genuinely curious about different perspectives on how I dealt with this situation. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel with notifications turned on because family drama stories like this one really resonate with people, and I'll be sharing more in the future. Share this video with anyone who's ever felt underestimated or undervalued, because sometimes we all need a reminder that our worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it. Thank you so much for watching my story and taking this journey with me. I hope it inspired you to stand up for yourself and never let anyone make you feel pathetic for being exactly who you are. Until next time. Remember that the best revenge is living well and cooking even better.